apparently a very young, rising superstar in American independent, well, I should say media now. So even though we go way back, there are huge gaps in my knowledge of Cary's career and Cary's approach to things because, quite frankly, it always changes. It's always a new challenge. And he's somebody who I feel as if 20 years from now will still be at the beginning of another beginning of a career, because everything that he does is a kind of a reinvention, but it's a reinvention that started at such a high place, even from the first steps. And we'll go back, I assume, through some of those early stages, in particular, your time here in New York and NYU, and snowboarding, not here in New York and NYU, and stuff like that. So we're gonna chat for a little while, and then I'd like to open it up to you guys, probably earlier than is the norm. We've got an hour together, and usually they wait till the last 10 minutes, but I think after about half hour, 35 to 40 minutes, we'll start to flag, the blood sugar up here will go down, and the lights will start to go up in there. And I believe the process for questions is that there's a microphone thing that will be passed around, and we'll just and we'll take the questions to the people who grab the mic first. Is that correct? That's correct. That's how it works. So just to begin, Cary, you are in pre-production again, and you're going to be making a pretty big movie here in New York City. This is your first time shooting in New York, right? Except when you were a student.
Since film school, yeah.
Yeah, and what's prep like for you now, having under your belt the 3 big projects and plus all the television and shorter works, which also I'd love to talk about too at some point. What does it mean to you? What does prep mean to you? And what do you know now that you didn't know when you were prepping your first feature cinema?
I think there's just like a tremendous amount of optimism in pre-production about like what you can accomplish. And they're like, oh, this will be easy. We'll get that in half a day. We'll move on to something else. And then your meetings, like, I don't even know why we're still talking about this. This is going to be easy. We got this. And then you get to set in the first film, and you're like, oh, this is way more involved than I thought it was going to be. And I think True Detective definitely was because it was such a massive beast, the pre-production aspect of that required meeting upon meeting. John Mallard, dude, he's in the room here for that one. He loves a meeting. And it's always that repetition. I'm probably similar to like learning lines for a play, so that when you're on stage it feels all natural and improvised. Those repetition of meetings, so that every individual who's involved with your production understands what's happening inside your brain. I think that to me is what pre-production is now.
Wow. And in terms of your own process and what you know of other directors as you prep a movie, do your crew ever say, wow, nobody does it that way, or I've never had that approach, or that's interesting, you direct or you rehearse like that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I would love to know what other directors do.
Yeah, it's funny, right?
I've asked like Tim Van Patten if I can crash some of his sets to see how he does it. And, some of the other directors that kind of take on massive amounts of work. I don't know if I do things differently, other than the people here are probably better equipped to answer that, who are in charge of wrangling me. I don't know how to answer that one, actually.
And what about rehearsals? How do you make that in? How much and how little?
I think more and more less rehearsals. I think in film school especially, we rehearse everything and really try to get a sense of what we're doing. And I think I had this concept in film school that I really had to know everything in terms of how it was going to be, whatever was shot on set. I had to know everything ahead of time. And I think part of that is also just when you're using less trained actors or less trained crew members, it's better to like get certain elements as tied up as possible. But then when you start working with, more qualified actors like Idris Elba or Matthew McConaughey, Fassbender, so on and so forth, you can actually rely on just an intelligent conversation ahead of time, really getting into what I think the character is. They bring their concept of what it is. We meet in the middle, and then I give them space on set to rehearse. And then when the whole crew sees what that rehearsal process is, then we can start shooting. Obviously, in much more involved scenes like the Warner True Detective, we had to do a lot more pre-planning ahead of time and a kind of rehearsal process. especially for stunts, for safety. But otherwise, I think most things were just kind of being worked through the day of. Even, for example, all the interrogation stuff, which we did in 2 days. One day, McConaughey did 29 pages text in one day. Sort of like a one-man show, you know.
Now you talk about the oneer. That's episode 4, epic.
The one shot.
Shootout, insane thing. Everyone knows the oneer now. Right? Yeah. Got it. Just
I
want to make
guarantee
sure.
there's people in this room who have not seen True Detective.
Yeah, well, I think it's good to point out that there's, for the audience questions, we're only going to take questions about the last episode of the first season. The rest is just a filler until we get to that. So less and less rehearsals going, but you know, some directors obviously shot list, you know, from Hitchcock famously and all the way even to Last of St. Vincent, a small independent film was completely shot listed beforehand. Not just shot listed, but actually storyboarded. How much of that do you do?
I think on True Detective also, as opposed to like say my last film, which was much more improvised and using non-actors, True Detective, because of the amount of work we had to do every day and what we were trying to get through, you know, we basically had about 12 days an episode, which is faster than I worked previously to that. I wanted to get at least the shot aspect out there, again, in an effort to get everyone else in the crew inside of my head, more than to say, how are these shots going to look next to each other? It's more like, well, in this frame now, you're seeing all the way down the road. Therefore, we're going to have to put period cars in there, or you know, they're going to have to just be aware of the scale of the shot. And then everyone whose departments are affected by a shot like that, then actually know what's going on. Unfortunately, we could have definitely used storyboards on the last film. There was just no time, because there was a lot of people surprised on set when they realized how many departments were affected by what we were doing. You know? I mean, like, we basically built an army of 200-something guys. We had weapons and basically war scenes in villages that had no idea what was about to hit. So.
Yeah, okay. And now you'll be shooting in New York and it's the same idea.
It's the same idea. Except like the locals here are like, you know, combatants in their own right. So.
We're a very film-funded town. So going back to even before you started the director maybe at the same time, you have a lot of experience with camera. You were a director of photography, you really know camera well. How much does that inform when you read a script? Are you already thinking in terms of frame and lens and that? And what do you bring as a director to the actual, your discussion with the DP that might be different from other folks, or just your own philosophy of that?
I think like Jane Eyre, for example, was the first film that I directed. My second film that I directed, but the first that wasn't my own screenplay. And it was the images in that script that first carried me away. And then I was familiar with the story, but it was that script's visual entry into that story that sort of got its hooks in me. So far I've worked with 3 different cinematographers, really. And all of them have, I think, the trait where we refer more to photographs than other films as references. And I think photographs are so much easier to communicate ideas because it's a single frame, and you know, a good photograph does so much more storytelling than the sort of the timeline of a shot, you know, that fourth dimension. We're able to like sort of hone in on our common sort of visual ideas for a story much quicker than I would say, like, you know, using a movie reference. And I think just having a solid grasp on what's required to do a shot also gives you a sense of like how ambitious that scene or day or shot might be, and you can then plan accordingly.
And I remember reading somewhere you were talking about what struck you about True Detective. One of the first things was the light, that kind of winter southern hemispheric light, still northern, but the southern part of it. And you described it very, of course now I've forgotten.
I probably said it better the first time. I tried to explain.
I'm not even going to go there. But what was interesting was that was the first image was actually the quality and the kind of scary quality of that blue light. Got you. What got you? What was a similar image that might have gotten you interested in your next film? Why don't you describe a little bit about the scary thing that's coming our way here in New York when we start shooting in a couple of months? Do people know what Cary's next film is?
No.
No. So that's
I'm
in
in 8 weeks away from starting Stephen King's It.
Wow.
Just the word "it" is kind of creepy. It's kind of like the word "moist." There's certain words that are all by themselves. You just don't like to hear. Anyhow, but it's it'll sell a lot of tickets.
I think for me, the image that I always see is the image I saw when I was 12 or so when I saw the miniseries, which is that white face in the sewer. Underneath that, and then that poor little Georgie being sucked down underground. So I haven't really gotten much past that part.
Yeah.
Still stuck there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a moist environment.
Yeah, moist all in one response there. So going back, you grew up in California. By the way, are you okay with more technical questions? Or do you like the bigger autobiographical stuff? Technical a bit? Okay, we'll stick to technical through the autobiographical. Went to University of California, Santa Cruz. Pretty groovy place back then. Still pretty groovy, I'd say.
I hear it's a party school now.
Really? Well, they all are, I think, these days. Right? The culture's flattened into that space.
The grade system was introduced while I was at Santa Cruz. Wow. And grades. It used to be just, what they call it, written commentaries or something.
Yeah.
Grades.
Yeah, Lord knows what's happened to the History of Consciousness program. Santa Cruz, probably not much. But
Angela Davis is still there.
She is. I had my picture taken with her and John Waters together 3 weeks ago, which is literally like the biggest wet dream for someone like me ever. It was like what? Anyhow. And I'm in the middle of the picture looking so psychophantic. It really is my most retweeted tweet, which is not saying much, believe me, I'm not a social media person. So you get to New York and NYU, and there, it's interesting because at that time there was a real documentary ethos, and especially with your ability with the camera, one would think, in fact, that's a real good match. So how did you deal with that culture when you were there, and how did you find your way to the narrative side of it?
In New York?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I worked as a camera operator on docs for a long time, even through film school, because it was the easiest way to make a little bit of money while I was here. But and even doing the research for Sin Nombre, I was kind of applying what I learned in documentary to my research side of that. And I think documentary was a great way for observing people, especially as a camera operator. You're not using one camera shoots. You're required to cover a scene and read people and figure out when you've got what you need to move on, which was also very helpful later on in directing scenes when you had no time. And Beast, for example, applied a ton of single camera documentary, ethics to covering gigantic shots with like 200 extras when we were at 30 minutes left to shoot something. To the narrative
By
side,
the end of the shot, there were only 100 extras left.
They had nowhere to go. You got them all trapped on top of mountains and stuff. But in terms of moving to narrative at film school, I think I was not really much of like a classic cinema watcher before film school. I watched Hollywood, classic Hollywood, but not so much, the foreign masters. And so film school really sort of opened my eyes to a whole new world of filmmaking, especially, my colleagues at film school. This is probably going to be too revealing, but one concept I had no idea of until I went to film school, my first class, my first semester, was that the concept of a character having to change over a period of time, which seems so basic in narrative. Of course, if you read books, they change, but this they have to change? It just never occurred to me. They just changed because things happen to them.
Yeah, that's so American, though. Yeah. We can get over that. Yeah, that's wild. So you made a film at NYU that was, I don't think it was your thesis film even, right? That got a fair amount of attention out there.
It was my second year film, Victoria.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about how that happened.
Anyone here NYU grad students? In your second year is the first year, you can make like a fictional short film with color, with dialogue, or at least that's how it was when I was there.
And now in your second year, you have your own debt clock in your room. I teach at Columbia, it's just as bad.
The debt clock starts, it's delayed, right, until you finish school.
No, now they have this private debt, and they just start the clock the minute you breathe on the piece of paper looking at the number. It's not a healthy environment. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, the debt clock was looming, and I had ideas for what I was going to do maybe for a thesis film, but I'd read this story about these immigrants that were trapped in a trailer in Texas, and I had just seen those 9/11 films that came out, and Alejandro Iñárritu had his version of it was just all black sound piece, and I thought, first of all, I love sound. Walter Murch was one of the first people I ever met in the film industry. I got to observe him finishing the final mix on Talented Mr. Ripley. So the concept of sound storytelling always really interested me. I think more so than the visuals, actually.
Wow.
And to do a short film in a theater, in a dark room, where the audience had to become those immigrants in the trailer, really fascinated me. So that was the story essentially that I wrote. And then my professors made me, as Boris Fruman, who was a famous Russian professor that was there, said I must shoot stop, which means I had to have an f-stop at some point in the movie and have a visual image. So that sound section got reduced to like a 2 or 3 minute section out of like the 10-minute short. But it was all sort of, that was for me the center of it, was how suffocating and horrifying it must be to be in a dark space like that.
And it's so interesting that often for the great filmmakers, it's the renunciation of at least one track of your sensorium. It's the turning down something. It's not seeing something, not hearing something that actually triggers the narrative motion and the emotional experience of a story. And you're constantly, it's what you don't see on screen, it's what you don't hear, it's what you feel. That relationship is so undernourished in our thinking about what makes a great movie, but it's often precisely when a filmmaker decides not to show something that the real cinematic takes in. It's fascinating.
It's interesting in terms of like, if the future of cinema is moving towards Oculus 360-degree, choose your own adventure storytelling, where is the storytelling anymore? Mm-hmm. And part of what you're saying too is like a narrative is by choosing the direction the audience has to take in the plot, that you're also depriving them of that choice.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Although I think that's something that people give up quite readily. It's really interesting. And to me, I've always had that experience where you go into a movie or you're talking about a movie that you've seen and it goes, oh, don't get, spoiler alert, and they always have that same phrase, you gave the ending away. And I'm like, so meaning you want to pay for it and not get it for free? And there is that sense of submitting to a kind of regime of submission to a narrative that, let's face facts. I mean, for those of you who saw Mission Impossible 4, how many people really thought that Tom Cruise might die at the top of the building in Abu Dhabi? Like, oh my God! No, you know how it's going to end. But hand over the money. And so I think that kind of game of investment in what you know but you don't, it's like that. It's really your all Rumsfelds, right? It's the in this sense the thing that he didn't say, the known unknown, right? You know, but you kind of pretend you don't. Is so important, and I think that's the same thing at the visual, like with great filmmaking. Like, you know what it is, so you don't have to see. You keep it unknown, and just has to play with it a bit and get through that process. And I think you've been. I'm
still trying to figure out what it is for episodic television, because it's clearly not plot.
There goes.
But there's definitely character. But it's like there's something where like I think it's the concept that we know there's more, and we're only getting so much. We're not completely satiated in that little bit, so we can keep watching. Like when you binge watch a show, they're not always based on cliffhangers or like some plot point you want to watch. You just know I got like an hour before I probably really should be sleeping. I should have slept an hour ago, but like maybe one more episode, and you go and it's 3 a.m. Or whatever. But I still can't figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah, it is a weird experience, and people always say. I mean, we'll obviously get into that subject because I know it's been a big one for you personally, and also I think in terms of the way in which the public engages with you right now, that transition from feature narrative to long form narrative, and the idea that they're in cinema that the fact is, even if it's part of a series, that when you go into the theater, right, and you sit down in the chair, you know the movie's going to end. That's part of the thing. It's like when you start, you know the end. It has an end. Where on television, and even a little bit, I think even your personal experience of True Detective, at the beginning, there wasn't really. I don't think they had finished all the scripts, and you didn't Did they know it was going to be this number of episodes?
We knew it was going to be 8.
You did?
Yeah, it was going to be 8. We just didn't know what 7 and 8 were. 6, 7,
Keep
8.
guessing. But there's that sense of not having an ending, like refusing an ending, and maybe, and if it's really good, there'll be season 2, right? So you're always, the investment is in fact to not end, and therefore narrative structure really loses its coherence, because if it was cohering, it would be signaling that, oh, here comes the end, when in fact everybody's investment is like, if this is good, it's going to keep going, and I'll stay up longer, and I'll binge forever, right?
I think, as opposed to say like The Killing or even like other shows that I would watch in a binge sort of fashion, one thing that we were aiming to do, at least with True Detective, is that like it's more like a mini series. Like the end would be definitive. We wouldn't extend anything into a second season. It'd be done, and then the next season would be a completely different set of characters and a completely different storyline. And so the balance of the episodes had its own arc, which wasn't necessarily mirroring the arc of a 2-hour film. It had its own sort of misshapement arc. That at least gave us a sense of like, oh, I can ramp up attention in episode 4 for sure. 5 and 6, things are going to tie together. 7 and 8, it all comes to an end.
But in the middle of that, you also had you had 2 separate narratives, and you had 2 separate narrative structures, obviously, because you have the storytelling that's going on as they're being interrogated. And so you have your wonderful guy sitting there just not buying it, or buying it, maybe buying it, right? And that's in itself a kind of story too. And you say you shot those in 2 days?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I'm saying, because Hart went all the way till 6, I think, and Cole was done by 5. So one of them had a little bit more time interviews. But I'm pretty sure we did all of. Can you verify this? Did we do all of Cole's in 2 days?
We did all of them in 3 days.
3 days. But both guys.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sorry.
Wow.
That's insane. And how conscious were you when you were planning those days of the need or the lack of a need for kind of visual pizzazz inside those rooms? I mean,
I completely threw that concept away initially, right from the get-go. No moving the camera, nothing. Unless there was, we're moving out. Like in the script initially, it was all going to be played as if it was on a TV screen. Which I said, like, we gotta get in the room at some point, So we move off that digital camera in the first episode. But otherwise, the camera doesn't move that much. And that's simplified in terms of the coverage. But then the other complication was that McConaughey was working as if this was just, as he should, this was one moment, scene, even though for us there were scenes stretched across 5 episodes.
Yeah.
So he had his script, which was great for him, his own little arc. But then I had my sides, which were based on the real episodic scripts, and he'd be jumping around. I'm like, wait, which episode are you in now?
yeah.
So I had to I took his scripts and then I transposed my episode notes onto his script, so at least we could be on the same.
Yeah, because cigarette and aluminum can continuity must have been a nightmare.
Anytime I see that ever again in the future, I'm immediately cutting that out.
Yeah. It was like, I was kind of this is how I watch movies, obviously. Like, how do you keep track of the cans? You just know. Anyway,
I look at the script supervisor and she's like mixing up ranch dressing with carrots and stuff. I'm like, are you noticing what's happening? So yeah, I got it.
the ash is just about to come off. Like, it's like one of those ladies with the slot machines, Reno, with the cigarette. It's like, the ash is
Those long toes all started because our first day of shooting, McConaughey's like the hell of it, he doesn't smoke.
Yeah.
And he was taking a few drags off the cigarette, and I'm like, let's just make sure we don't make this like a middle school girl cigarette.
Yeah.
And so he took that to the whole other degree, Cheech and Chong those things.
there were sinus passages that I didn't know existed, where the smoke is coming around and out. That's insane. So I want to go back. Let's go back then to NYU and to Victoria. And the short obviously does so well and gets so much attention. Sundance, the Academy, all that stuff. And then you're now in a world. But how do you go from that world to maybe the most dangerous gang in the world that you're hanging out with, and just kind of going to make a movie with, and somehow Sin Nombre starts to take shape? What was that process?
Well, first, like I had to write the script, some version of the script, right? And the first couple of years I was at NYU, there were number of students that went to Sundance with their films, and there'd be interest, or they talk about interest in the feature that they could write. And then 6 months would go by and they hadn't written anything yet. I'm like, well, are you going to write those screenplays for this person who at one time was emailing you? They're like, oh, I'm still working on it. And I kind of took that as a lesson on what not to do. And a year later, those people weren't responding to emails anymore, and their kind of moment was done. So when I was there, I was sort of determined not to make that same mistake. And when the lab asked me if I had a screenplay, I didn't have one ready yet because I hadn't been planning on making a screenplay about the short. But I had researched things that couldn't fit in the short, which was the trains, and decided I'd write some fairly poorly executed version of that story. And it was more of a triptych that would end with the short film, because that would at least solve 20 pages of script writing, just put the short film in the feature. But one story was about a gang member and a girl, and another story was about a bunch of kids traveling from Honduras, and then basically just combined those stories after another year of research and made Sin Nombre. But a lot of that was driven by the labs, turn something in, and then just by that ticking clock of debt. So I was able to get into the labs a year after I was there with the short at the film festival, and then I met you guys about a week or two after that.
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, as you know, the greatest piece of advice you get in film school is always, make work and write what you know from your own life. Mm-hmm. And clearly, as a Swedish Japanese American snowboarder from Santa Cruz, you just followed that precept completely through your whole career.
Yeah. Every film, right?
Every film is just...
Well, I am from Oakland, California.
Oh.
I'm definitely not
Are you from Oakland or are you from Piedmont? I'm just trying to get a little,
I've lived in multiple neighborhoods.
Oh, okay.
But no time in my life was I ever gangbanging them. You're in East Bay, the upper crust and the bottom crust cross all over the place. It's definitely a place where economics does not divide people the same way as it can in other places. So the concept of gangbanging, the sort of the culture around it was not foreign to me, and it wasn't really hard to apply some of the little things I'd had or interacted with as a kid into parts of that story. But definitely was never lived any part of that story, whether as an immigrant or as a gang member.
It's interesting then. It seems to me that there must be, aside from a genuine fearlessness that should be noted, duly noted and appreciated, whether it's just reckless physicality of professional snowboarding or hanging out with, what is it, M65?
MS-13.
MS-13. I don't know. The M65, I think, was actually a bus.
M85 is a bus.
It's a
gang. The French electronic music gang.
Okay, that must be it. It's so hip, I don't even know it. That's got to be it. But there's got to be something about that ability to look at the world with a camera on your shoulder and allow people to be who they are with you in the room. That must have been part of your own particular entree into your career. It seems to me that seems absolutely apparent. And clearly, you get that from watching Sin Nombre. The level of performances from these folks, professional, unprofessional, non-professional, and often the most professional actors are the most unprofessional, and the non-professionals are really professional. But for them to be that, they need to trust that person behind the camera. They need to really feel that confidence.
It was really interesting to watch on this last film, which hopefully you guys will watch. Is coming up later on this year. The boy that we used in Beast of No Nation was essentially a street vendor before he shot this film. Zero film experience, not much of even an educational experience. And he was scouted by Harrison Nesbitt, who was Avery Kaufman's son. He cast our film for us. And so basically, he was a non-professional, and we gathered a bunch of kids we thought had charisma and potential, about 30 of them into a little group in the hotel our crew was staying in, and we do these theater workshops in the basement. And we try out scenes that were kind of like near the script, but not exactly like the script, and improvise, and see if these kids could play the variety of emotions and sort of actions that are about to take place in the story. And they quickly, kids are fast learners, so they quickly understood the concept, they quickly got the idea that the better they did, the longer they stayed in this thing. And weren't back out, you know, like 3 of the kids lived in the street. And they literally, one of them lived on a trash pile in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Accra, in Ghana. And anyway, so to watch this kid go a month from production, from knowing nothing about acting, to suddenly being chosen to be the lead in this film, probably still not wholly understanding what the story was about, much like Edgar, who was cast by the Hombre, who was, until he saw the movie at Sundance, wasn't able to put together the concept of the scenes that we shot, you know. And so until he saw it together on screen, he had no idea that he could do that. And so, but to watch Abraham, who was the boy we cast in this film, who was about 14, he looked like he was 11, get to the point in one of our final weeks of production, we had another difficult one long take that he had to perform probably the most intensely that I'd ever asked him to do in the film, and do it in a oneer, and have to have like 6 or 7 kids around him also perform, and watch him become the leader amongst those kids and make sure they stayed in focus and didn't fuck up the shot, so that he didn't have to keep doing this over and over again. And I didn't have to say anything. I gave almost no direction to those kids the whole time. Like minor things, like blocking things, like Kim Kong, you're getting in the way of the camera. You have to don't land there, you know, and other minor things. But otherwise, Abraham was guiding that shot. So from 1 month starting production to 1 month into production, to turn into that kind of professional, as you were talking about, was pretty astounding to watch.
It's amazing. Do you feel what legacy of that relationship with him, and all, you know, the non-actors who populate your films, but also populate the worlds that your films depict. And obviously there's quite a difference between, here we are in Tribeca Film Festival, and the world of Visa Nation or Sinombre. How do those relationships sustain or morph, or where do they go? Where do people go?
You have to there's a reality of the fact that they probably are not going to have a career as an actor. So this experience is probably going to be a one-time experience, and to treat it as such, and not to look at this as being like, oh, this is my step into becoming a rich person, or my step into becoming famous or anything. It is this one thing. So whatever money you make, save that money. Whatever, if you're really interested in acting, let's figure out how to get you into an academy for acting. For Abraham, you know, he's only 14. We have to get him up to speed with school. So right now, he's in we put him in a boarding school back in Ghana, so that he can kind of get up to a normal 14-year-old level of academics. That doesn't mean that it's doesn't mean he's going to finish high school. It doesn't mean that he's going to go to university or anything. It just means that, like, you know, you've by nature of crossing into these people's lives, you're going to have, there's some responsibility there to maintain contact and be there, but you're not adopting a child either. So,
yeah. We'll skip over Jane Eyre because we're talking about Beast in the Nation. Yeah, I think we all read, like, in Times Square, something about Netflix and $12 million and you know, that kind of thing. It was quite an announcement. How are you? What's the story with that release? How's that going to work? And what are you excited about? What were your trepidations?
It's the exciting part about it, like anyone that makes something, is that more people are going to see it than say, for example, at a traditional platform release on a small release company for a film of this subject, of this size. So you have a film that is basically, there's not one white person in it. You know, it's not DiCaprio saving Africa. It's all mainly African cast.
Well, he doesn't have to be in that movie. He already saved Africa.
He did save it. It's true. And no diamond will ever have blood on it again. The movie is a very difficult subject. It's not, you know, it's like it could easily become one of those films where someone's like, that seems too serious, I don't want to watch that yet. But I think that by nature of the force of Netflix being behind it, it'll be in people's faces enough. They're like, okay, I'll give it a try. And I think once they start watching it, then hopefully they'll be consumed by it. But the difficult part is, you know, the defining yourself as a filmmaker is that the concept of releasing on a digital platform or an online platform at the same time as it's going to be released in cinema really strikes the fear of God in your heart, that people are actually going to still go to the cinema to watch the film, when if they're only paying $6 a month, they can watch it for free on their laptops or, you know, via their Apple TV in their living room. But it was designed to be a film experience in a group like this, collectively, with strangers in the dark, and see this story. And I know, based on my experience at home watching movies, and based on my experience watching films in the cinema, the experience in the cinema is 100% more immersive than it is at home when my phone's going off and I'm checking emails and I'm sort of not really putting all of my attention into the story. And I'll miss things. Every shot that I put in there means something. So if people take it away to read a text message, they're already missing some element of the story. So, you know, Netflix's big thing is like consumer choice. So as the audiences start to make that choice, and if they continue to make the choice to just watch online, then the cinema experience will be reserved only for comic book movies. And that is, in a way, it's the biggest democratic challenge for an art form, that you have to ask the audience to be aware of the fact that they are just as responsible for the death of cinema as the people who make it.
It's you. But it is true. I mean, like, when we look around the room, at your own, you know, just look inside yourself at your own viewing habits, and of course you too, right?
Yeah.
How much now of what we consume of both cinema and other is, you know, laptop up?
Yeah. All right, so on a busy week in September, how many of you will watch a movie on a Friday night at home on your laptop? If it's a movie you want to watch that week?
So you're home alone on Friday nights, you've just admitted it. Okay.
All right,
You felt
how
that?
many of you guys will go to the cinema?
Okay.
This is a film festival audience. This is
We
fine.
set this one up. We set this one up. I mean, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please go to the cinema.
I mean, it's interesting though. I look, the Netflix hype right now, and hype is often in our business reality, which is interesting, is of course that.
By nature of hype, it becomes reality.
Yeah, you know, if you're good enough at it, and these guys are, is that the windowing is not the big issue. That the tilt in terms of audience share for whatever your pure cinema, your cinema pur, is the absolute, you know, that special moment when you're in a dark room with a bunch of strangers. Although I don't know why you didn't watch your movie at that point. There's plenty of other things you can do in the dark room with strangers.
But he's been spending too much time in Berlin.
Yeah, too much time in Berlin, it's true. That the tilt in terms of audience share is already so shifted over so hugely to these other devices, televisions, computers, etc. So why not just let it happen simultaneously, right? Why not just let that happen all at the same time and just give people the choice? And obviously, there's the flip side of this, which is that you have this new image of you, the audience and the consumer, as this gigantic consumer baby who wants what he wants it, wants where he wants it, when he wants it now, right?
Free.
And for free, exactly. And of course, it's not free. What you're giving up is precisely your exact geo-positional target, all of your friends' addresses, every porn site you've ever looked at, et cetera, and the last time you clicked on a J. Crew sale ad. It's all part of a thing. So every single day of your life, right now, 300 times a day, somebody is selling a data point about you to somebody else. Just the truth. And so the system is meant precisely to feed you into that machine and create the information about your viewing habits and your social network that can be turned into account out there. So we're all part of that business. We're the candy that's being dangled in front of you to get into that, kind of suck yourself into that world, right?
Trying to figure out what kind of marketing we'll learn from Decent Nation.
We really don't even want to attract those people. Actually, you do. You really want to, okay, oh yes, what time is it? Hold on, we promised you a long audience time. Yeah, look at that. We got 18, 19 minutes. Fantastic. So great. So why don't we dive into audience questions? We're going to have a hard time seeing you because of the bright lights. But I think, can the person with the microphone make the decision who to hand the mic to? And therefore, I am like blemish free. It's not my fault that you didn't ask the question. Sir.
Hi. My question is, so as you had kind of touched on with the Beast movie, I was wondering if you could answer how to market a non-obviously money-making idea to like film companies and that kind of thing, and how you go about marketing a non-traditional idea that isn't necessarily having made money in the past for a company, so that they'll do that while at the same time maintaining your vision for the project?
That's a tough question because, and maybe James could answer that better than I could, but my 2 cents on it would be that nearly impossible to get anything without a precedent finances, because everything's based on an algorithm. Really, like they just punch in numbers. They know what they can make on foreign sales on it, plugging in this actor and that actor. Even I'm talking about like a $2 million film, you know, like which is films are made for 100,000 as well. But even for as low as $2 million film, there's these algorithms, and if it doesn't fall into a certain category, it's almost, you know, nothing's impossible. There's never a never, but it's very, very difficult. And I wouldn't even know, like, I couldn't even know like who these days would be doing it. Like even Sin Nombre at Focus probably wouldn't have been done 2 years later, just based on the crash of the economy.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's probably true. Yeah, I can't answer the question because everything I've made has made money, and I just don't manage stuff at all. But look, the way the entertainment industry works, and by entertainment, that means we entertain you, is always the same thing, which is it's kind of the same thing. So you're very comforted to know that when you press play or when you buy the ticket, you're assured, and that's the serialization, even of the cinema, part 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, 7 is just broken $1 billion at the box office last week, right? 7. So if it's something with a number after it, that's like awesome, right? So it's the same, and then you have to sell it. But it's different because they're like in Japan or something.
But there's also you develop your name as well. So like if you have good stories, and first they're a webisode, or first there's something smaller, and you just keep growing an audience, then also there's that. Your work then speaks for you.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing is, and then we'll go on this, is the fact that within these highly sophisticated, but in fact completely unknowable movements of culture and capital across cultures and borders, right now, the way in which markets get segmented and which those segments get monetized is changing so quickly that the good news is that the people in the decision-making positions, they're going to get fired really quickly. Anyhow, there'll be somebody new to pitch to like next week, because it's not the golden quote that nobody knows anything, which, by the way, a lot of people actually know a lot, so I just never thought that was great advice. Like, no one knows anything. But to a certain extent, everybody's looking for the next thing to know still. And one way you can do, the press of your question was like, how do you pitch something that will make no money? Well, that's tough. But what you can say is, how do I pitch something that the budget for which, and by budget I mean both the negative cost and the potential marketing budget, in the media through which you want to reach your audience, equals some market segment that may laugh or cry in a satisfied manner at the end of your entertainment, okay? So, for example, my career, 90% of it is making women over 35 cry. And that's the 4th quadrant. That's put my kids through college. I bless you.
Is this like credit history? Can you go and log it and find out?
yes, exactly. And that's important to know. Like if you walk in and say, look, these people identify with this kind of psychographic and this demographic and this graphic, however because these things are constantly changing. I think I can affect them emotionally, and I think I do it for a price that I can reach them. Then you have a story to tell. But if the story is like, well, we'll make that much money, then probably. Okay. Yes. So yeah, you're looking. You're somebody else is standing up. Oh, there's a whole other mic over there. Wow.
Hi. Hello. Oh, whew.
Yeah.
Okay. You were just saying how you let your work speak for you. I was wondering, in the stories that you tell, what attracts you to the films, the scripts that you've chosen or written, and then how, by the way that you direct, is there a feeling that you want your audience to leave with that speaks for you as a director?
I don't know if there's one thing overall. Like, it's like when you go to dinner over the course of the week, you might lean to more Italian or Japanese over the course of the week, but generally it's kind of whatever your appetite is. Obviously for a film, it's a much longer commitment, so you gotta really like that Italian food. But so maybe that metaphor doesn't work. It's more like a relationship. But you know, there's a side where like there's an image that grabs me, or a character's dialogue. There's just elements in there where I think if it's not my own screenplay, it's something I think is masterful about it. If it is my work, I haven't done enough yet where I think I can analyze that on a global scale of what it is.
Oh, I can. I'm volunteer.
According to Schamus, I like to show people entering and leaving rooms.
It's true. That's actually true. But I think the other thing, and look, this is the genius of Cary Fukunaga, and why I think you're finding your voice and the voice that's resonating with so many people, is that almost every other filmmaker who has tried to create a career that would be now you are the envy of and the emblem of, has tried to do it by finding heroes and heroines, and like they have certain delimited features. And I think Cary has always looked at the person in the corner of the room, or the person in the back in the kitchen cooking, or the delivery guy, or that person that nobody's paying attention to, and realized that there is a center of a universe that is so rich and huge, and then usually connects with people who would never be cast or thought of, and even Jane Eyre, I think, falls. We didn't get a chance to talk about Jane Eyre, but really that I think Bronte was that person also, and was the person who gave voice to those people at that time. And this is already with 3 features and some great shorts, and by the way, some other stuff that even your advertising often does this. Whitman and those people. Who else does that? Who else is like, actually, the camera's over here on our hero, and then Cary just goes over here, and then that person walks over, and for the rest of our lives, we're following them, and it's amazing. So that's my understanding. Cool. All right. Oh, look, we have another.
Hi,
Yes.
Cary. Hi, James. My name's Alexandra. I have a question about True Detective, and I will try not to spoil it for any of y'all who haven't seen it.
You know what? This is spoiler alert free. Like everybody can.
But I have a question about a scene in particular. Towards the end, we have the 2 police officers, and they're driving in the cemetery, and they talk to the killer. Although at that point, they don't know that he is the killer. And the camera almost seems to be afraid to kind of move in towards this guy, because now the audience knows he's bad. So I was just wondering if you have a different approach to the camera work in the beginning of True Detective, when the audience doesn't necessarily know what's happening, and when the end, when they're kind of starting to put it together and realizing what's going on.
That was a scene that you're talking about when he speaks to the camera.
Yeah.
We've been here a long time. That whole thing.
Wait, he's the killer?
There was no specific philosophy to the camera work necessarily changing, but the tricky part is we had to reveal something on his face in that shot, which is always kind of like tonally tricky, because you don't want to end the episode like dun 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 dun. So that was supposed to be the last shot, and instead I chose the wide shot that kind of pulls out. The last 2 episodes are tonally a bit different from the rest of the show, and you're obligated to make certain choices to serve that tone. So I wouldn't say it's philosophically different than it was at the beginning, but yes, it was a choice. I don't know if I answered the question.
And you really don't want to end it with doesn't it? You want to end it with wah, wah, wah. That's all we can do. All right, I guess we're being fair and going the other way. I don't see. Oh, there's a, okay.
Hey.
I'm sorry you missed the dinner in Rome. So sorry.
He worked with us. He was one of our interns.
Do you think it's gonna be a milestone, Bond, because it came out on a platform and not straight to the theater?
Visa donation. Did you call it Bond for short? I like that. You know, it's when the articles start coming out about it, I think people are going to watch it as a benchmark to see, again, how people respond to it. Not only, I think, in audience participation, whether it be at home or in cinemas, but also industry recognition of it or not. Because whether you believe in awards or not, the idea of honoring a film like that, which could potentially be considered an online film, albeit having a theatrical appearance, there's still, I think, a lot of old guard who like to consider cinema something that only exists in the theater.
And those old guard Academy members watch 70% of the films they vote on their screeners that they get for free.
But it was in the cinema at one point. So, will it be something that a touchstone or something? I don't know. I think only time will tell.
And it's hard because, again, the hype and the reality, we read last year all that great publicity around a wonderful film, a great success for the distributors of Radius, the Weinstein Company. And of course, it was like, oh my God, Snowpiercer came out day and date on things, a whole new thing. How you guys have invented a whole new business. And you're like, yeah, what about Margin Call 2 years ago before that, which did the same thing and got to $7 million, and nobody had seen that thing coming. And but Margin Call, I'm sure a lot of you guys saw. So really a wonderful independent film made here in New York. And it was very interesting, the dynamics on that, because at the time, it was video on demand, right? So it was pay-per-view, and it was in theaters and art houses. And what they found was, at that time, was the older audience, which was going to see it at Lincoln Plaza, had no idea about, like, they didn't even know how to use the remote to get the pay-per-view. So they were like going to a movie, and all the younger people were like, dude, yeah, $3.99. Oh yeah, let's see it.
I wonder if there's a difference too, because Margin Call could still be considered a drama, whereas Snowpiercer could be considered genre. And was it Follows Day as well?
I think so, or close to
Does
it.
anyone know the answer to that?
I don't think it is.
Yeah, theatrical before.
But it will. They usually go, oh, so we're dating it. We forgot to announce it, and now it's going to be this, whatever. Even Snowpiercer was, they were off a few weeks, but it's changed now. The old folks actually know how to use the remotes. They've learned. So the dynamic is different.
Kids have programmed it for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, question over here. Over that.
Hi, thanks. I have a question about your upcoming project on Stephen King's It. I was wondering what initially attracted you to that project. Is it just that you had seen it, when you were younger and liked it? Are you trying to move towards more horror and science fiction? And additionally, how closely will it adhere to the book and the original work?
I can't give away too much, but I would say in terms of the choice, someone asked earlier about the themes. I mean, I guess the only continuing thing is that children die in all my films. So if you want to consider the way Pennywise sort of like took off children for a while and then finished with this giant spectacle of death and mayhem, then I guess it would sort of cap off my children dying series of films. And hopefully after that, I'll move into much more pleasant, there.
And wherever the mic you may be.
Okay. Mr. Schamus, Cary-san, over here.
Oh, hello.
Hello. My question goes back to an earlier topic in the conversation about getting into the shared consciousness of your crew so that you're in the same place, creating the ease of the shoot. And one person I never hear anyone talk much about is the production designer. And I wanted to know what kind of relationship you like to have with your production designer. Is there a unifying metaphor that you work on? The mise en scène, what is it that, how do you like to work scene by scene, only pre-production, that creates that feeling?
I love the production designer's part of the sort of pre-production office, usually, and across the board, because all the photographs are up on the wall, every bit of like potential references that you've never even thought of before, because they've combed images from all over the place on the wall for a set, for a scene, for a character. And it's actually a really great place to come up with new ideas, or like, oh, we saw this great location scouting today, maybe we can combine this ideas, and it becomes sort of like a sponge. So, really a sponge in terms of a creative center. So the relationship is really just based on, in the sort of the hiring or casting process of that production designer, somebody who shares your vision, and you know that by the feeling, by your gut feeling, by looking at the images they present. And again, like I said, a still image is the quickest way to find out if you're seeing the same thing. And then it just expands from there, and it becomes more like a sort of a rapid fire bit of excitement as you kind of pull more and more images that hone in on what you want to do. And then reality sets in a bit about what you can actually afford to do. But when you're talking about True Detective, and one of the first things I read at the end of the first screenplay initially was the church on the plains where they find that painting on the wall. That was in the first script initially. And I loved that image of that sort of the bones of that church on the sort of like flat plain at the end of the day, and that sort of dead light.
And so when we were looking for a location, for example, for that church, we never found one in Louisiana, so we built that church. And when you have images that are so precise, you can actually really transpose those images to reality pretty quickly. So,
I think my favorite part of that question was you said you called it Cary saw. I'm going to call you that from now on. I think we have time for one last question, so whoever's holding the mic.
Cary, the last three
Cary saw.
Cary saw. The last 3 episodes of True Detective were groundbreaking. You guys obviously struck a chord with a lot of people. You crashed HBO Go. You had people hanging on at the edge of their seats. When you say that you didn't know what those 3 episodes were going to be, what does that mean?
it's absolutely frightening because you're starting shooting and you haven't had a chance to plan anything yet. And so we basically planned in pre-production for True Detective, this is the first 4.5 episodes. I think we got pretty deep into 5. I guess the first 5 episodes really. But 6, 7, and 8 basically had to be planned while we were shooting. There was no hiatus. So it just meant like we had to double up our work, and where before shooting, a shooting day we'd go scouting, at lunch we'd have production meetings, after shooting we'd go see new locations, and you're already doing a 12 or 14 hour day, and then at night I'd go visit the editor to try to get the first couple episodes locked up. Saturdays more scouting or tech scouting. It just meant you did what you would have done normally in 8 weeks on the top ends and bottoms of days. It was a little bit insane.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Cary, it has been such a pleasure and honor to share the stage with you, and thank you guys for hanging out with us.